Yes, I am recommending spooky books in March because this is war. Watch the video, it'll make sense. Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and yes, I am at war, but like a war using books. A readathon. I'm doing a readathon. Specifically, I'm doing Realm of the Readathon, or Realmathon, which is a war-based readathon where these 4 different factions, 4 different nations, are all vying for survival. There's like a magic-y portal thing happening, and the winning nation gets to continue living in this magical realm while everyone else gets wiped from extinction, so everyone's like really wants to stay there. Now, usually for a readathon, if I wanted to do content, I would make like TBRs, you know, standard. This readathon doesn't really work with that because actually there's one whole list of prompts just for attacking other realms and one whole list of prompts just for defending. There's a lot of prompts. You don't have to fill all of them out. You can use up to 5 for every book, but you can only use them from like one list. So your book is either attacking or it's defending. And so trying to do any kind of TBR list over such a variety of prompts was always going to be impossible. But I joined this readathon for a reason, and not just because it gives me an excuse to wave my sword around in a video. Don't worry. It's a prop. But anyway, I have a list of criteria that any readathon needs to meet for me to want to do it. Does it allow me to include review books? Does it have indie book prompts? Can I kick ass at Christmas trivia? This one has 2 out of 3, so not bad. And as a result of the indie book prompts being bonus prompts, meaning that they can be added to either attack or defense books, and they're really big prompts, 10 points, I got really invested in this. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do a list of indie books specifically for my nation, my realm, to help us get the most bonus points because we are strangely competitive in that. So I am part of Sanctum, and Sanctum's genre is, well, it's actually kind of an amalgamation of several genres, but essentially the vibe is spooky. Because you know me, I'm just so gothic and aloof. But regardless, this realm's genres are like horror, thriller, gothic romance, or mystery, the spooky stuff. So that is what this list is going to be. This is essentially me helping my fellow Sanctum citizens to really maximize all of our bonus points, because you get bonus points both for reading indie books and for reading within your team's genre. So I'm just here to help my team win, but obviously if you are interested in any of these books, definitely look them up. If I have any reviews for the various books in here, I will put them down in the description below. Feel free to check those out. Obviously, since we're talking about spooky things, there are going to be some darker topics discussed, at least one instance of a book that is primarily about relationship abuse, so be on the lookout for that. And if you do want some kind of Realmathon TBR content from me, I'm trying to put together some kind of short list. It's not going super well because I haven't played my own TBR game as of filming this. But if you want that, let me know down in the comments. If you are on my team Sanctum, join me in our victory cry. It's so much fun. We are so like ultra strategic in the group chat on the Discord. It's so good. And obviously, if you would like to join the Realmathon yourself, I will have the link to the announcement video down below. Now, it's time to actually get into the books. First up is Heart Haunt Havoc by Freydis Moon. This is a queer Gothic romance all about an exorcist named Colin who goes to this, what he thinks is a haunted house, and discovers that the owner of the house, a non-binary person named Bishop, is hiding a lot of secrets along with all the ghosts in it. This is very dark, very twisted, a lot of talk about religion, which is a staple of the author's work. I've read several things by Freydis Moon now, and they always include some aspect of religion in it, but I liked how it was formatted. I liked the interplay between Catholicism and looking for redemption, as well as some paganism, some bruja or bruja type magic. I loved all the aspects of it, and it definitely is spooky, creepy, disturbing at times, dare we say. That climactic scene was okay. Some elements of low-key body horror, I guess you could say. Does it count if it's a corpse? I don't know. But, well, yes, there is a romance in it. This is definitely more gothic than romance, I would say. The author actually mentioned that they were having a hard time with people not understanding and getting surprised by all the dark stuff in it. But it's dark. At a graveyard digging dark. So you could still count this. I don't know if Gothic Romance counts as a hybrid genre, because that is one of the prompts, but it is queer. The author and both of the main characters are trans. That was really fun. There are some steamy, spicy scenes. Not terribly graphic. They're like that kind of artsy thing. But I always love trans people getting to feel sexy. That's nice. And in general, I'm a big fan of this author's work. I'm on the ARC team, so I've definitely, bought in. And I think it would be a great pick for my fellow Sanctum friends. Quick editor's note here. I know the phrase Gothic Romance might lead people to believe that this book should actually be for the romance realm, and you might be able to put it as that, but the reason I'm putting it as a Sanctum book is because, one, more people have shelved it under horror than romance of those who have read it. The author themselves has had to warn people about all the horror in it because they're going in expecting it to be a romance, and several other people that have read it have only described it as a Gothic horror with a romance. So, Gothic Romance does sound short-term like it would belong to a different realm, but believe me, the things that happen in that climactic scene, it's horror. You need to expect horror going into it. But it might make for a good hybrid book. Up next is Then Came Darkness by D.H. Schleicher. This is a historical thriller / maybe horror set during the Great Depression, all about people struggling in the Great Depression, but then a man with revenge on the mind comes up, a serial killer who believes that he has been tricked out of what was rightfully his, and he has come to this tiny farm in the rural countryside to collect it. Fun fact, I actually reviewed this book years ago, and the author still uses a byline from that review where I referred to this as like the Grapes of Wrath, but with more murder. There is on-page murder. It is fairly graphic. It's actually been a really long time since I've read this. Like I said, it was years ago, but I remember it having great ambiance. I loved the interplay of the world around being as much a character and the kind of despair and darkness inherent to the Great Depression playing into the darkness and despair of a serial killer rocking up. It really meshed really well together. I don't know, this might be considered a hybrid because it is both historic and a horror / thriller. I'm not even really sure to call it a horror because it kind of takes its time. Maybe that just makes it a slow burn horror. I don't know. I'm not as well versed in that genre, but loved the ambiance, loved the historic interplay with the genre, and yes, it is John Steinbeck with more murder. So if that sounds interesting to you, you'll probably want to check this one out. So the good news about this next one is it's a short story, so, pretty easy to add to the TBR and up those points. Downsides, it's probably going to be the weirdest short story you've ever read, and that is A Puppet Scorned by Jamie Court. This is erotic horror with sock puppets. I'm not joking, okay? Every character in this book, every sentient character is a sock puppet. There's no human hand in the puppet, okay? Self-sentience. So the erotic part of the erotic horror, doesn't exactly play as much. Like, there are supposed to be, steamy parts, but again, sock puppets. So they don't have the parts. It's actually funny. It uses knitting as a euphemism. It's really funny, but it is dark. It is horror. It is body horror, that ending, I actually had to reread this one because I ended up reviewing the anthology it got picked up in, and it's it's something. But it's definitely dark, definitely horror, and again, it is a short read, so you're probably not going to get a lot of points for that page count, but if you just want to get some of those prompts done, get some of those bonus points, this one would be a great pick. But if you do add it to your TBR and read it, you have to tell me what you thought about it, especially the ending. I really want to know what other people think about this, because I am so sure that this is the absolute weirdest thing I've ever read, and probably one of the weirdest stories that's ever been on a booktube channel ever, and I need that validated. I need other people to read the weirdness and tell me that I'm not wrong. So if you do read this one, please let me know. It is just so hard to find a good cloak that really makes you feel connected to the dark forces. Anyway, our next book is Listen, The Sound of Fear by 9 Star Press. This is an anthology made up of a variety of queer voices talking about how the queer aspects living in today's world can feel like horror, and I really liked the overall vibe of it, although there was a little bit of tonal dissonance between some of the stories. I wish they had curated the stories a little bit differently, because you would kind of like springboard back and forth between like real big horror or grief, and then another story that's a lot more cozy mystery-esque by comparison, and as a result you can kind of feel like your emotions are being ping-ponged if you read it all in one sitting like I did, but I did enjoy particularly the story with a trans boy who is forced to go to an all-girls school, and kind of like the tonal dissonance of that. And in general, there were a lot of great stories, a lot of focus on queer representation and how trying to be queer and engaging with the world around you can be really tricky at times, and basically how that can lend itself to the horror genre was really intriguing. I really enjoyed it, and it is a short story collection, meaning for me at least it read pretty fast, and it might for you as well if you pick it up for the readathon. Or I guess like anything else, I'm not gatekeeping the book. Up next is The Unwelcome by Jacob Stephen Moore. This is a classic coming-of-age tale where a group of young adults decides to go to a cabin in the woods for some relaxation. Only one of those young adults' ex-boyfriend is a malevolent, body-snatching entity that rocks up and starts bringing hell. So, this is a fairly classic story setup. Obviously, you have a group of I can't remember if they're teenagers or young 20-somethings, but you know, the age of making bad decisions, in the woods, in a cabin, and our protagonist, Kate's boyfriend, Lutz, shows up, and it turns out he's like a body-snatching entity from a different dimension, and she just didn't know, apparently. The one thing I really liked about the body-snatching aspect in it was it wasn't a one and done. It wasn't like, oh, you've been body-snatched, you're compromised, bye now, because they would always then wake up and like get their body back, but then it could happen again. So it's like, okay, you still don't want to kill anyone, right? Because they're still in there, they're still themselves, and they can come back, but it just means that you can get repeatedly body snatched over and over again, and it gets very dark. And it took me a second. I actually had to go reread the review, but I got some weird, vague sapphic undertones between the protagonist and her best friend throughout the book, and the ending, as trippy as it got, seemed to cement that. And for that alone, I liked the idea. There are some times where it gets a little preachy, a little look at the state of the world. I am such a smart knower of things that I must teach you, reader, about them. Thankfully, that's not too overt, and a lot of that is Lutz just being that particular brand of asshole. So I have to imagine that at least part of it was supposed to be annoying as all get out. But I do like this one for the sheer creepiness. It does get very dark and gory at times. It does fall on some of the standard horror tropes, but overall, a good pick for some super dark reads. Up next is Run Girl by Sammy Goldberg. This is a YA thriller all about two sisters who, when they were younger, went into the woods and came back out never the same. One of them has no memory of what happened that night, and the other swears that there was a serial killer in a cabin in the woods. Despite searching, no one ever found anything, and the girls became social pariahs. But in our story, as 16-year-olds, bodies start popping up, and you have Amelia, who doesn't remember anything but really wants to know, and Anne-Marie, who does remember some things and is terrified of things being unearthed, trying to stop her from seeking things out. Now, I liked the concept of it. I did feel like it fell into that thriller stereotype of we have to make virtually everyone horrible people for this to work. It seemed like every reveal was connected to another person has done yet another horrible thing. And it just got to be too much after a while, especially with the way that the people in town reacted towards the girls. Like, in the modern day, we understand how much trauma affects brains. And so the fact that they could become universal pariahs because what they said happened as children in a night of trauma didn't have all the evidence for it. It didn't make any sense. And it seemed to just be like, oh, well, that's just the way of things. But like, no, that needed more commentary than that. Regardless, I did like the end twist reveal. I did guess it, but again, as you have heard before on this channel, I never hold that against a book because I am constantly trying to guess what the ending is, and I will probably come up with 4 or 5 possible endings for every book I ever read. So one of those being correct does not hold anything against the book. There should be clues to solve the mystery yourself, and there were here. I just wished that I liked any of the characters enough to care about the reveal because, whew, things got dark. However, I will say that I am not the biggest thriller person for that reason. So if you're someone that likes the genre as a whole, then this kind of genre staple won't, I'm not going to say won't affect you at all, but will probably be more familiar to you. So feel free to check this one out for some more thriller fun. Another creepy anthology, we have A Krampus Carol by Burial Day Books. This is holiday-themed horror and thriller stories, all set among that cadre of creatures connected to Christmas, like Krampus, but with a much darker theme. So we're talking a lot of long polar nights and Icelandic or Nordic myths and a lot of darkness with that. In general, I liked the general spookiness of the entire thing. There were 1 or 2 stories in the anthology that I took particular umbrage with, but generally speaking, I loved how this story went way back into like far medieval myths around the holidays and Yule time, and I loved just the variation. It wasn't all Krampus, despite the title. There was a lot of different myths and different Yuletide creatures being brought up. So while it is nowhere near Christmas time or Yule time or the time of any of these creatures' holidays, I would still suggest this one for a general spooky book, especially if you want something spooky but that's a little bit different than the other spooky books, because it is both spooky and festive. This next book I am going to spoil, and I do so with the author's support because this is really not a book you should go into not knowing what it is. And that is Hematoma by Matteo Polk. If you look at the synopsis for this, you'll read all about a young man named Shay who has a big masochism kink, and he discovers that this new tattoo artist he goes to is a vampire and is 100% on board with that kink because he is a sadist. And he's not just a sadist in the BDSM way of the word, because this is not a romance, not a paranormal romance. This is a thriller, okay? This relationship does not end well, is not a happy ending for the couple, okay? It's abuse. It's a lot. It's tough. There are some erotic scenes early on, but it gets dark, twisted, and trigger warning-y later on in the book. Okay? I still think it's great catharsis for the concepts and working through abuse and recovering from it, and the allegory of drinking blood as a stand-in for abuse is really strong. The author is a queer man, and I love that representation for this kind of thing, because so often these stories in which queer men are suffering seem to be written by not queer men, because queer men's pain is seen as somehow less than particularly cis women, and this story fully accepts that a queer man's pain is as important as any other demographic of pain, and it really goes into that. So, great catharsis for talking and recovering from abuse, a great allegory, but it is an abusive relationship. It is dark. It is a thriller. It might look like a romance on the surface. Please do not go into it thinking that. The author doesn't want people to go into it thinking that. This was when I got for review, and he flat out told me he did not want people thinking that, so I had free reign to spoil it. But I still think it is a very important book, and I would still recommend it. Just, be warned. Up next, we have The Songbirds Refrain by Jillian Maria. YA body horror. A young woman named Elizabeth decides to go to this strange... Is it an art installation? Is it a carnival? She's not sure. But she goes and blacks out and wakes up in a cage to find that she's sprouting feathers. And it goes into detail about the body horror of feathers slowly starting to bubble up under her skin and come out. And I'm getting... Sorry. But there's a lot of deep, dark ideas in this. The ambiance is great. And there is a lot of queer rep in this because our protagonist is queer, and she seems to have these visions of this girl she's never met before but feels really called to her, and there's references to this previous sapphic couple that had some legendary fallout with mystical, magical, and far-reaching consequences, and there's a lot of mysteries to it. Why this is happening to her, why the woman that's doing this to her seems to hate her so much when she's never met her, and the just overall vibe is that kind of beautifully, tragically dark, and it does have a hopeful ending. It's, when I say sapphic, there's not very much of an on-page, like, traditional sapphic romance that goes on between our protagonist and the girl in her visions, but there's a reference to that, and there is reference to another sapphic relationship. So there's the theme in it, but if you want a traditional characters meet and fall in love vibe, you're not going to get it from this. It's much more focused on the body horror, on the creepy, dark vibes. But I have loved this one. I've reviewed a lot of works by this author. The other one from her YA set is much lighter in tone than this one. But I think this one might still be my favorite just because the sheer vibes are that perfect kind of dark, spooky, but also gay. So it's great. Highly recommend. Let's end with something slightly less demented, and that is Chasing Ghosts by Dean Cole. This is a haunted house story where a bunch of people are invited to a said haunted house to either film or hold seances to try and figure out the thing that's going on. Our protagonist is Quentin Strange, who is brand new to his partner, Kat. He is the photographer to her journalist, and they still haven't quite figured each other out, but they're going to this haunted house as their first real big assignment, and haunted house stuff happens. This is the setup for a series in which the protagonist will go to like different hauntings and figure them out. So the vibes are really great, nice, dark, and spooky. This is another queer one as well. Our protagonist is gay and is still reeling from a previous relationship turned tragic, and that comes up a lot. There's some really sweet moments of learning to let go and getting closure, and also the potential for him to have a new relationship as the nerdy photographer to the gruff smoking writer. Obviously smoking is bad for your health, but the vibes are immaculate. And I have been waiting for so long for the sequel to this one. The author is taking his time. This one came out in 2020, and I have been so spoiled by indie books because most indie authors would never dream of not putting out at least one book a year. And I have waited for so long for the sequel to this one. I know it's gonna be good. I'm excited. You're gonna send me a review copy, right, Dean? Please? Anyway, this one is probably better for the people who still want to read in the genre of mystery or dark, but don't want super dark and twisted. It did have some bittersweet, tragic moments, like sad emotions, but the vibes, again, are fantastic. I love the growing connection between the partners as the story goes on, and in general, it's just a nice haunted house story. And that is it. All the recommendations I have for my fellow Spooky Sanctum citizens. If you would like to read any one of these anyways, there are points you can get for reading another team's genre. Feel free. And you know what? I'll even be a readathon player. If you would like any recommendations for your team's genre, please let me know, and I might give you one or two recommendations down in the comments below or on Twitter if you want to follow me there. I just want everyone to be reading more indie books all of the time. It's just kind of my thing, and I would love to help more people do that. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. If you plan on adding any of these to your TBR, please let me know. If you want to read more indie, especially let me know that. That always makes me smile. I might get out my own version of a TBR later, although it will probably be more of like a short list of books to maybe get to. I am really excited for this readathon though. It's been a lot of fun, like strategizing and plotting with everything. It's going to be so much fun to actually like attack or defend. I'm hoping that I actually have the audacity to attack, because knowing me, I'll feel mean for attacking, even though that's literally part of the mechanics of the readathon. But who knows? Maybe I'll overcome that and be an attacking machine. I don't know. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.